Welcome, fellow Phoenixes, to the Spiritual Phoenix Podcast, where we make a daily offering to the divine by putting our past on the pyre, searching the smoke for spirituality, turning the ashes into art, adapting isolation into connection, and manifesting mental wellness. I'm a spiritual phoenix named Ross Cessna, and I wish to ignite the authentic expression of your soul into any avenue that elevates consciousness. I don't want to tell you what to think, but to get you to think. Create your own understanding and express yourself in a way that is uplifting. We are the artists of our lives, and today is a blank canvas. Let's collectively create a better tomorrow. And now we're going to take a moment and focus on what we're grateful for today. Today I'm grateful for a fractal of the endogenous source energy that is the sacred masculine, and the fractals of that represent themselves in masculinity and nature, and the fractal of that represents itself as man. And with that, I'm going to get into a couple quotes. The socialization of boys regarding masculinity is often at the expense of women. I came to realize that we don't raise boys to be men. We raise them not to be women or gay men. We teach boys that girls and women are less than, and that leads to violence by some and silence by many. It's important for men to stand up not only stop men's violence against women, but to teach young men a broader definition of masculinity that includes being empathetic, loving, and nonviolent. And that was said by Don McPherson. We need to stop raising boys to think that they need to prove their masculinity by being controlling, or by not showing emotion, or by not being little girls. And that was said by Gloria Steinman. The philosopher spends in becoming a man the time which the ambitious man spends in becoming a personage. And that was said by Philibert Joseph Roux. How beautiful maleness is if it finds the right expression. That was said by D.H. Lawrence. He who makes a beast out of himself gets rid of the pain of being a man. That was said by Dr. Seuss. As I stated on yesterday's episode on the sacred feminine, I would do an episode on the sacred masculine, so I'm doing so today. It's peculiar, but albeit not too surprising, there aren't many quotes about the godliness of men. The only real quotes about God are not surprisingly about God in regards to certain faiths, and oftentimes those faiths, in my interpretation, represent God as vindictive, judgmental, infallible, and of infinite power without a counterbalance. Basically, it is God's way or hell, which I feel is both telling, very representative of the mob mindset of today, frightening and sad. I'm going to be honest. It's easier for me to accept the sacred feminine within me than my masculinity. It is something I am learning to embrace over time. It isn't the easiest of proposition because of the sacred masculine within me, honestly. You see, to accept my masculinity, I have to accept every part of the divine masculine that is refracted. As a man, I can't really see the negative sides of the sacred feminine, as I stated yesterday. I am privy to the main temple, not the inner one. However, as a man, I am allowed into the sacred temple of masculinity, and it has been desecrated. I'll be honest, being mentally healthy, of reasonable mind, and free of mind and mood-altering substance, the inner temple has been desecrated as well. It looks like the aftermath of a night of binge drinking fueled debauchery, violence, humiliation, angst, isolation, and the foundation of all previously mentioned, sadness. My therapist suggested I write a list of negative masculine attributes and the positive, and then see which is longer. I stated I can find the positive by looking at the opposite of the negative. I agreed, and I find it fitting to put them on the table. Let me preface this by saying I don't believe all of them are solely attributed to the sacred masculine. One of them would be violence, and the opposing force of violence is peacefulness. One would be hate. The opposing value to that is acceptance. One would be devaluing. The opposing one to that is being appreciative. One would be being oppressive. The opposing one to that is being liberating. One would be being aggressive. The opposing one to that would be patience. One would be being fearful. The opposing one to that is fearless. One would be being mob-minded. The opposing one to that is free-thinking. One would be xenophobic. The opposing one to that is unbiased. One would be narcissistic. The opposing one to that is humble. One would be misogyny. The opposing value to that is phylogeny, which is the love of women. One would be being greedy. The opposing one to that is being charitable. One would be being judgmental. The opposing value to that is tolerance. One would be being infallible. The opposing one to that is open-mindedness. Granted, I didn't get all of the traits, and some of the opposites aren't exact opposites, but it's the best I can do as I write this a little before 6 a.m. The one underlying thread that ties all the negative aspects of my perception of the sacred masculine together would be fear. At one time or another, I have most likely, I shouldn't say most likely, I have been guilty of committing every one of those negative masculine elements. Violence probably the least. The only time I really got into physical violence would be with my brother. I'd like to tell you my experience with the profane sacred masculine and then address each topic in my experience. Growing up, my father, although he was and is a good man, fell into several of those negative aspects of the sacred masculine. I don't fault him for it. He is only human, and he did the best that he could. I'd be lying if I didn't say that those things didn't affect me, and although I can acknowledge today that my problems were from my level of perception, a child is ill-equipped to rationalize or navigate through much of the unhealthy concepts of their upbringing. Let me preface the following by saying I love my dad, and I will resolve the statements I am about to make at the end. My dad always wanted, and still does, always wanted what he thought was best for me, regardless of what I wanted or actually needed. When he remarried and focused all of his attention on my stepmother, he taught me how to become obsessive over women. When he made promises and plans about certain things and never followed through, he taught me that dreams and promises were pointless. When he had his set of rules for me, a set of rules for my brother, and my stepmother's kids fell under different rules, he taught me to have multiple standards. When he essentially ignored me unless I did something wrong, he taught me how to seek negative attention. When he was infallible, he taught me how to oppose authority. When he condemned my expression of emotions, he taught me I was weak for expressing them. When I did my best and he told me I could have done better, he taught me to be a perfectionist and that I would never be good enough. When I tried to express to him how I felt, the only way I could express a full thought without being interrupted, a letter, as words were always something I was well equipped to express, he told me my emotions were wrong and that the only way I could express myself was the wrong way. When he told me I never followed through with anything, he taught me I was a failure. Basically, my dad unintentionally taught me I wasn't enough in almost every capacity. The other capacities that are filled in as one develops had carried over answers or were filled in by culture and the other males in my school. This broken young boy fell in where he was accepted as was the island of misfit boys. This is ultimately what led me into drinking and using because all of the other kids were doing it and I had to conform to be accepted. In school, I was never really directly picked on by anyone outside of my group of friends or my own head. However, I subconsciously learned that I wasn't attractive to women unless I played sports. I wasn't manly unless I was athletic. My strong suits weren't valuable. I wasn't smart unless I knew it all, and so on down the line. I just drifted through life on the current of drugs and alcohol that would slowly erode any positive feelings I had left. Eventually, this led me to wanting to move out of my dad's house, writing him a letter expressing how I felt, and then being chastised for it. So now the only strong male figure I had close contact with was out of my life. That is when my demons really began to surface. I got to learn what being a man was outside of the draconian rule, and I tell you, it was the exact opposite of whatever my dad was. After culinary school, I moved to Vegas, as I had mentioned several times before. Instilled with an overbearing ego that is a coat of arms for young men, especially in the culinary field, I had my first real interactions with other men outside of public indoctrination. Everything I did was wrong. I was stupid. I was feminine. I was too emotional. It was fun to upset me. I had no good qualities. I was just one big living, breathing failure. This further entrenched in me how worthless I was, and I acted, thought, and felt as such. I talked yesterday about the mistreatment of women, and I will express things I didn't in relation to the sacred masculine. You see, the women in my life, such as my mother, were in direct opposition to the weight of masculinity dragging me into the muck. However, this set up a perpetual roller coaster, and because of my lack of self-esteem, I needed women to validate me, to make me feel somewhat manly. What would start out as genuine affection would quickly mutate and metastasize into possessiveness, volatility, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, jealousies, insecurities, objectification, and sexual conquest with the subconscious intent of dominance. With the war of my concept of masculinity versus my own masculinity raging in my mind, I became a shell. I was cynical, bitter, depressed, isolated in a room full of people, anxious, self-centered, depreciating to others as well as myself, narcissistic, misogynistic, also its opposite, a misandrist, one who hates men, elitist in the sense that anyone outside of my circle was less than, wrong, profane, and so on. The reset button came when my mind revolted against me via psychosis. I didn't fully learn the lesson then and resume my old ways only to get my teeth kicked in again and again. My submission to the lesson of the mysteries, the source energy, or the androgynous source that fractals off into the sacred masculine and sacred feminine only came about this past September, or so I thought. You see, up until today, I had still been at war with the concept of masculinity without my own knowledge. I mentioned earlier how the inner temple had been profaned. It wasn't done by other men. It was done by me. I had become that which I was opposed to without my own knowledge of it until I started thinking about this topic. The depth of this concept was amplified when writing the dialogue for this episode. I mentioned earlier the negative and positive elements of masculinity. Let me explain in further detail. Violence versus peaceful. Although I wasn't physically violent towards anyone, really, with the exception of my brother in use, I sure was emotionally violent, mentally violent, and verbally violent. Anger. Shit. It is evident that I had a lot of anger to purge about this topic. I still may have some to process as the concept of negative aspects of masculinity is so deeply ingrained in my psyche. Can I purge it? Certainly. Hate. I admitted I was a misandrist, or one who hates men. Devaluing. I devalued masculinity as a whole by my perception of the majority of it being flawed. Oppressive. I was oppressive in the sense I thought every man should act like I do, which is ridiculous. Aggressive. While not aggressive in the physical sense, I certainly would be emotionally, mentally, and verbally aggressive. Mob-minded. Similar to my response for oppressive, I wanted to oppress men into my beliefs to make them loathe themselves like I did. Put them into the mob mindset, basically. Xenophobic. While not xenophobic in the traditional sense, I had a fear, distrust, and anger towards anyone outside of my approved circles. I was xenophobic against my own countrymen more than any. Narcissistic. I was narcissistic in the sense that I felt I was the epitome of what a real man should be. Misogyny. I admitted my earlier bouts with misogyny, and actually was more currently controlled by misandry, as I mentioned. Greedy. I have been greedy in the sense that if men don't have anything to offer, they are worthless to me, as well as in the material sense in recent past, as well for a large portion of my life. Judgmental. Judgmental? Me? No, never. Wait, this is about honesty and purging. Obviously, I can be extremely judgmental. Although I am typically more stringent towards myself, after one crosses a certain point, they become beyond redemption, which is something I'm working on. Infallible. I think I'm correct in assuming I have never been wrong. However, I would be wrong. This correlates with my narcissism. In my thoughts that I am the height of the awakened, enlightened man, and I am in absolute correctness with my every assumption about masculinity or about anything. Fearful. I move this one to the bottom because you know what is at the root, the base, the support of everything else prior to it. Upon evaluating this, Oh, it would be fear. Upon evaluating this, these aren't the traits of the sacred masculine of men. These are the traits of boys, scared little boys who have grown up to hide their fear behind their other traits and behind this toxic masculinity, this profane sacred masculinity. So now that I got the truth, let's encapsulate everything. I put all of those in the past tense because I am aware of them. I realize what I have to work towards, and addressing them as such has reduced the severity of the symptoms of my toxic masculinity. Those brutish beasts I was looking at are reflections of me. Now I am left with the Herculean task of cleaning the inner temple of masculinity. How can I start? By doing the following. As I mentioned above, these traits are not distinct to the sacred masculine. Being peaceful. Being peaceful within myself is a start. Being myself regardless of the actions of another man. Being lenient. Accepting men are in a similar process of involution and maybe on a different level than me. I don't overcome the problem of profane masculinity by acting as it. Showing acceptance. I mentioned acceptance in regards to leniency, but I also need to accept that I don't know all there is to know about being a man, about being the best man I can be. It's a lifelong process. If I accept other men as they are, regardless if I like their actions, I can then accept myself. Being appreciative. I can appreciate that every man is different, and the perceived wrongs of men in my life have actually made me into the man I am today. So thanks, guys. Liberating. While I can't free other men from their own prisons directly, I can continue to do what I have been doing them and showing them how I liberated myself. It falls into Plato's allegory of the cave, though. And if you don't know the allegory, basically there's men in a cave and there's a fire behind them. They're chained so they can only see the wall, and they see these shadows on the wall. One man escapes, leaves the cave, sees the world behind it, and comes back to tell the other men about what he's seen, how it's a fire, how the guards that they see walking behind them are people. But nobody believes him because they can only understand from their level of perception, and they've never perceived that. Being patient. I can start by being patient with myself as I learn to practice the lessons I learned from this process. Free thinking. I used to think I was open-minded, but I view open-mindedness now as the course of a river. A truly open mind is an ever-broadening river. Although there may be times of the stream narrowing, it fractals off into infinity eventually. Unbiased. I can have my opinions about men. I can have my own code of ethics, but I can't demonize men. When I do, I profane a fractal of the divine source. I allowed myself the liberty of redemption from my past, and I was the most stringent enforcer. I can disapprove of their actions, not the individual as a whole. That is like judging a book of one sentence. And with that being said, let me say this. I don't condone rape. I don't condone murder. I don't condone pedophilia. I don't condone violence. I don't condone racism. I don't condone devaluing people because of their sexuality. I don't condone hate in any way. And I'll leave it at that. I think people realize that people can change and they can evolve and people make mistakes. But I wanted to underline those things. All those things are caused by fear and by illness and sadness in those people. Humbleness. Come on now. I'm the humblest humble that ever humbled a humble. In all honesty, I can step that off my pedestal and remember this Devil Makes 3 lyric. Don't act like you're above me, just look at your shoes. It's nice to apply to other people, but best applied to me. Phylogeny. Phylogeny is the love of women, and I have that one. It is the love of men that I am learning. I need to be androphilic, which is the love of both, but I'm going to keep our relationship platonic, fellas. Charitable. This is the one I practice best, the best I can at this time. As I begin to reap the benefits of my work, I will be more philanthropic with money and time. Tolerant. I am very tolerant of almost everyone except the intolerant. This paradox is in the process of being resolved because one inconsistency of tolerance makes one intolerant. Open-minded. I am open-minded enough to know I can continually expand upon this infinitely. Fearless. I am practicing fearless by doing what I just did. Fear would have kept this in, to shelter it, to hide it. Fellas, I have to apologize to all of you. You see, I disassociated myself with you because I possess the exact same potential and traits as all you do to exhibit the same behavior I was in condemnation of. I apologize for profaning masculinity. That being said, I need to admit some truths gained from my experience. This concept of men being weak if they are emotional has to stop. This attitude of emotional invulnerability as strength is a direct cause of the emotional frailty of men. Thinking yourself as impervious to emotions or being less of a man for them quite literally creates that fear that perpetuates the rest of the troubles of man in my personal experience. As I am a man, I think I can speak for all of us. Players, in regards to women, stop this conquest of adding another notch on the belt, this attitude of superiority over them, this objectification, this temper tantrum when they lose interest, or the hit and run mindset. This mindset to emotionally as well as verbally abuse them, this concept of an attempt to dominate them. Stop being afraid of losing them or the fear of getting close, of the power of women, of the need to feel superior. We are on equal ground, and when you disrespect women, you disrespect the sacred masculinity, masculinity as a whole, and ultimately yourself. Nice guys. You finish last with women because you put them before you. The things you do are with hidden intents behind them. Expectations. Be a man. Be who you are. Stop hiding behind the persona of a nice guy. We all have skeletons in our closet. The reason women get bored or never move forward with nice guys is because they aren't genuine. They tend to be smiling snakes in the grass, and I say this from personal experience. Try being a gentleman, which I will explain in conclusion. Guys, in regard to each other, how about instead of putting down other men, minimizing them and so on to make yourself better, you elevate them, find and encourage their strengths, uplift them. We are a brotherhood, and we are only as strong as our weakest link. So when you put down other men, you put down yourself. Accept that men are different, and they have different skill sets, outlooks, opinions as a whole. Thinking you're more than makes you less than. To those guys scared, intimidated, disenfranchised by masculinity, it's okay. In my opinion, that is the birth of a better man than you were. You can overcome it if I can. You are valuable just the way you are, and you can be a catalyst for the evolution of other men by your own involution, the expression of it, and igniting the involution of other men. It may be messy, painful, scary, and the like, but as your birthright, you were equipped to be a man in any capacity, whether you are straight, gay, bi, gender neutral, transvestite, cross-dresser, etc. It doesn't exclude you from manhood. Those that think it does exclude themselves from true connection with the androgynous source. Finally, men, myself included, let's learn to be gentlemen in theory, in thought, in speech, and in action. Brutes put themselves on top. Nice guys put everyone above them. Gentlemen put themselves first so they can help other people cross the finish line with them. We are part of the human race. Now let's resolve the beginning statements about my dad. Dad, I love you. You did the best you could, and you only wanted the best for me. Much of what you did and acted out makes sense to me now, and although I disagree with how you handled things, I accept it. I forgive you, and I will admit that I learned to be a man because of it. Kind of like the Johnny Cash song, A Boy Named Sue. But you ought to thank me before I die for the gravel in your guts and the spit in your eye. So thank you, Dad. You made me into a man. Not the way I wanted, but the way I needed. Now thank you for some other things. Thank you for the love of music, my love of recording, my love of nature, fishing, camping, baseball games, and so forth. To the rest of the men in my life, Grandpa Cessna, I never got to know you, but I remember a few things about you. Thank you for standing up for me when my brother rode his bike up my back. Thank you for the shared love of baseball. Thank you for the love of building things. And I don't have the gifts of carpentry. Although I don't have the gifts of carpentry, I am a builder in another light. Grandpa Saricki, thank you for being you. Thank you for instilling in me a love of travel, the gift of male creativity, a strong work ethic, which I practice much better now that I am clean, male tenderness that I haven't found in many other places. Uncle Richard, you really helped me further develop the love of my nature my father instilled. You also acted as a secondary father to me, and I am so grateful to have had you and have you in my life. You taught me that men can have physical strength and not have the hidden frailty that many men hide behind this strength. My brother Adam, thank you for being a comrade in the wars of my mind. Regardless of how crazy I was, how much of an idiot I was, you always accepted me and never vilified me. You always let me in. I apologize for being distant lately, but I am still learning to live clean, and it isn't that I don't want to visit you, it's that I don't have much time that isn't dedicated to personal involution. I will make time for you and look forward to some disc golf when the weather changes and some board games or video games in the interim. My stepbrother Danny, you were a good friend until I walked away from everyone on that side of the family. I look forward to getting reacquainted with you when I resolve some of my issues. My half-brother Dylan, I am grateful you let me come back into your life after running away from that side of the family when you were just a few years old. It was a gift to attend your graduation this summer and see that you share the same love of music both Dad and I have. I look forward to growing our relationship and learning more about the guitar from you since you are a prodigy. My other uncles, Jeff, John, Tom, and George, thank you all for being in my life and each teaching me other elements of masculinity I lacked. To my male friends, thank you for accepting me when I couldn't accept myself. Thank you for the laughs, the support, standing up for me when my frail and fragile self wrote verbal checks I couldn't cash. I don't have time to name all of you, so I will name the ones I can think of now. Shane, Nick, Todd, Randy, and Mike L. Thanks for being you. Nick, when I need to be a little less attached to what I'm experiencing, I hear the one quote-unquote mantra you used to tell me. To a new acquaintance I really haven't had much of a chance to talk to, Brandon Beechin of the Positive Head podcast. Thank you for showing me that one can still be a man expressing things like you do. Be confident, be secure in their masculinity, but not be a douche nozzle. Thank you for telling me to tell new stories and that I am mentally healthy, as well as encouraging me to do this podcast. To all the other men I have encountered and have yet to meet, thanks for being you, regardless of if I approve of your actions. You define me by either being someone I want to be like or by being someone I never want to be like. Regardless, I can learn from you all. Finally, to the sacred masculine, thanks for the strength and fortitude to help me make it through my journey so far. You have made me into a spiritual warrior at war with the darkness in myself. I apologize for wrecking, profaning, and trashing the inner temple. My actions in the future will be to absolve myself of this crime and restore its sanctity. And I'm going to put this episode on the pyre now. That was very cathartic and healing to me. If you have a topic you wish to hear me discuss, or if you would like to be a guest on the show, please contact me via Facebook Messenger. Ideal guests will have had a major life obstacle they are overcoming or have overcome, and will have an inspirational, life-changing philosophy, spiritual awakening, or insight of lived experience to share. I do free tarot readings occasionally, and I'm building up a database so you can select a reading at random choice or read the most recent reading. A link will be in the description below. Social media, media links will be below. And if you could please leave a review on iTunes if you like the podcast, it'll help me reach new listeners. And please take the time to respond to the PodTrack listener survey, as it helps me better understand my audience. I love, respect, and appreciate all of you. Make it a magical day. Love and light. Namaste.